Hey everybody, thanks for logging on. We're going to go ahead and give it just another minute to let folks settle in and sign in. So grab some water, lunch, whatever you need, and we'll get started here in a few minutes. All right, everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to the Oregon Outdoor Recreation Summit. Excited to have you all here for this webinar, and we are going to be talking today about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and some action steps towards change for our organizations. My name is Tashea, and I'm really excited to be the monitor today for this extremely important conversation. Just a little bit about me, I'm the founder of a company culture design agency, Wyld Lynx Consulting, and I'm extremely passionate about how we design our company structures, policies, strategies, and procedures to create sustainable workplace cultures that really makes everybody and every community member feel valued. I do truly firmly believe that everybody in our company community should feel like they belong, and we have some work to do to make that happen. And I'm really looking forward to learning from each of our panelists today on how we can all take action steps to creating a more equitable and inclusive community. A few housekeeping items before I let everybody jump into such a great conversation. First and foremost, a huge shout out to our summit sponsors, all here located on your screen. A big thank you to this group of partners. We could not do it without you. Just so you all know, this session is going to be recorded. It's going to be available on Travel Oregon's YouTube channel later this fall, and you will all receive a link when that's available. Throughout this session, we're going to have the Q&A feature running, so that is at the bottom center of your screen. Feel free to submit any questions via the Q&A throughout the presentation, and at the end of the session, we're going to walk through those, and we're going to do our hardest to get to every question. We also have the chat feature up and running, so please go ahead and open that. And to get us started in the chat feature, we'd love to hear from the participants for the question, what is the most challenging part for you and your team when starting to focus on DEI work? Please go ahead and post your answers if you'd like so in there. Lastly, at the end of the session, you're going to have a survey link pop up in your Zoom webinar browser window. We'd love to hear your feedback. These sessions are going to be going for the next month, so your feedback is very valued, so please go ahead and take a few minutes there. All right, without further ado, I'm very excited to dive in and to introduce our panelists today. We have a lot of information to cover, but to get started, let's go ahead and have everybody introduce themselves, and to make it a little fun, let us know your favorite location to recreate. Spirit, I'll pass it off to you first.
Thank you, Morgan. Ni'oke, Dr. Spirit Brooks, Nahashitna. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Cheyenne and Arapaho Nation. And I just want to kick us off today by acknowledging that the land that we're collectively and virtually gathering on today are the traditional unceded territories of Indigenous peoples. And as we like to acknowledge at Outdoor School, all outdoor education and recreation takes place on Indigenous homelands. So it's native protocol to introduce ourselves first by saying who we are and where we're from. And to answer your question, Morgan, I'll start with my favorite place to recreate. I'm an equestrian. I have 2 mules that I love to spend a lot of time outdoors on. And probably my favorite place to recreate is the Three Sisters Wilderness on the back of one of my mules. So just deep gratitude today for having me on this panel. And also I want to express my gratitude to the ancestors today and also to present and future generations of Indigenous peoples of Oregon. So I'm a research coordinator for the Oregon State University Extension Service Outdoor School Program, and I'm super happy to be here. And you want me to pass it off to someone, Morgan?
Sure, go for it.
All right, Mauricio, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, Spirits. My name is Mauricio Valadrian. I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia, in South America. My favorite place to recreate. I want to say the Portland downtown River Esplanade. I have lots of memories there of my little ones, and moving the stroller around and the seasons passing, and right by the Burnside Bridge. About me, I come from film and television production background. I've done about 20 years of diversity communications work, consulting mostly, in the last 6 years. I am the interim board chair for Hike Baby, which probably Jessica will talk a little bit more about that. I also am the vice chair of the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Advisory Committee, which I will be plugging in later on as well. And and most recently, I started working as a DEI and anti-racism consultant for a global firm. What else? Yes, very importantly, I also I'm a manager for a Northwest Family Vacation app, and a collaboration between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Intertwine Alliance, trying to get families with young children connecting with nature wherever they are and as they are, particularly underrepresented and underserved communities here in the Portland metro region. And I'll shut up now. I'm going to pass it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Mauricio. Hello, everyone. I am Jessica Carrillo Alator. I'm calling in today from Beaverton, Oregon. And I think one of my favorite places to recreate is the Southern Oregon coast, where I grew up, right along the California-Oregon border. And there's so many options there between the river, the redwoods, and the ocean that it has a lot of variety and things to enjoy. I am a mom of 2 little girls, and I'm also the executive director for Hike It Baby, which is a national nonprofit that is dedicated to getting families outside with their babies and young children. And we started in the Portland, Oregon area. Now we're in over 300 cities across North America. And I'll pass it to James.
Great, thank you, Jessica. My name is James Edward Mills, and I am a freelance journalist and independent media producer, and I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin. And I am a adjunct faculty at the University of Wisconsin Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, and I live not very far from campus. And I make my home on the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk Nation, also known as Dejo. And I as Spirit had mentioned, I think it's critically important that we always recognize that we are indeed on the ancestral homeland and the enduring homeland of Native people. So definitely wherever you are, I hope you'll take the time to make that acknowledgement. I have a specialty in outdoor recreation and environmental conservation as a reporter, but I also have a further specialty in diversity, equity, inclusion in public land management. I'm the author of the book, The Adventure Gap, Changing the Face of the Outdoors, and the co-writer, co-producer of the documentary film, An American Ascent, which details the first all-African-American team ascent of Denali, the highest peak in North America. And in terms of where I like to recreate, frankly, picking a single place is always very difficult for me because I think it's like picking a favorite child. But I always like to say that my favorite place is wherever I'm going next. And I have no idea where that is. In the times that we're living in now, it's difficult to know where anybody is going to be traveling anytime soon. But I am looking forward to doing some fly fishing to mark the end of the trout season here in Wisconsin in about 2 weeks. So I think my favorite place is going to be on a river.
Thank you guys all so much. James, I agree that the river is usually my place to go. So I'm excited for you to go get out on a river trip. So I'm going to dive. Oh, go ahead.
I totally forgot to say that I'm a father of 4, a husband, and my love hostage is watching this. So, hey, Mama.
I love it. Thank you. Great. So I'm going to dive right into the questions. And our first question is for all of you. What does equity mean to you, and what experiences have really helped you shape that definition? Mauricio, I'll go ahead and pass it to you to start us off.
So what shaped for me that notion? I'm not sure that I have it fully shaped. I think it's such a constant variable, and definitely the definition for everyone is very different. I came into the space of outdoor equity 1000% by accident. I was working on broadcast television and in Spanish language television, and organizations trying to get more folks of Latino heritage onto their public lands reached out to us, and we created partnerships and tried to do that. And in the process of getting to understand their objectives and how they were going about it, I noticed there was a massive blind spot, just lots of deafness, great intentions, but lots of blind spots in how we're going about this. And so there isn't equity. And I think there is a certain degree of misguidedness about how to address it. And what it means to me, really, is that you should be allowed to show up in any of these places that, that are so easily available to dominant culture exactly as you are, fully as you are, with the many layers of dimensions of your identity, and feel safe, feel welcome, and feel a sense of ownership, whatever that is. And so that would be my definition. I can let some of my co-panelists jump on this one.
Well, I'm actually really glad to answer this question again, because I was asked this exact same question on another panel, which we're all getting used to doing multiple panels this week. And it's interesting because I think one of my favorite answers of everyone who shared was it's constantly reconciling the difference between equality and equity. And I think that we all operate under the presumption that we are equal, and that's just not true. I mean, and it's not true from a historical standpoint in this country. It's not true just from a personal standpoint as individuals. And we can just basically parse out all the differences that we have as individuals. But I think, as Mauricio said, that it's very important that everyone is allowed to be who they are in the places that they're in. And that's really where true equity comes in, because equity is actually, it's a verb in the sense that it is an activity where we actually help to assure the equity and equal treatment of all people, and also an equality in their ability to enjoy a space, especially if we're talking about the outdoors, in whatever way is meaningful to them. you know, and so that doesn't mean that everyone can show up and be like everybody else. And that's what we call being equal. The reality is that people will show up as they are, and when they show up, they need to be who they are. And sometimes that might run contrary to what we might think of as what you're supposed to do when you're outside. You know, because I think a lot of us have defined what outdoor recreation or environmental conservation is based on the historic myths and narratives that have defined our culture for 4 centuries on this continent now. And I think a lot of that has to do with how we reconcile what people bring as themselves to an experience. So that means that you're going to come to it with different foods, different styles of how you wear your hair, you know, different clothing items. I mean, all these different things that define who we are. I think that in terms of equity, what we need to do is to make sure that everyone is equal in their ability to be welcome in the space, and as Mauricio very wisely said, and to be who they are.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica, or Spirit, whoever wants to jump in next. Go ahead, Jessica.
You can go. Yeah, I think just to echo what James and Mauricio are saying, that I think definitely it's an ever-changing, ever-active process, and it's something that I still spend a lot of time thinking about on a regular basis. I think with our work at Hike It Baby, it really started to stand out when we started to branch into lots of different communities and seeing that there are different needs in rural communities, different needs in urban communities, different cities and different states have different vibes and different things that are important to them, different terrain, all kinds of things that happen. But there are still some things that bring everybody together, especially with families and children, that are commonalities that we want to make sure we include and think about. And so for us, it's really started to stand out with it's one thing to really say that everybody's welcome and say that we want everybody to come and hike and join events. But when we start to see the same type of people show up on every hike in every city, we're not doing our job in making that invitation really meaningful to people. And so what do we need to do to extend those more authentic invitations?
All of this is really resonating for me. So thank you all for kind of setting me up here. This idea of welcoming, of bringing our whole authentic selves to the outdoor experience is really resonating with me. So what does equity mean to me? So when I think about equity, I think about my own context, my own lived experience, and all the things that sort of bring me to this place in my work. So as a kind of a mixed race, white passing person who grew up poor, often the spaces we lived in were outdoors. And so I didn't have this connection to the outdoors that was really about recreating, but it was more about surviving. As I've kind of grown as a professional and as a researcher with Outdoor School, as someone who has throughout my career really unapologetically centered race and racism and really challenged dominant frameworks in my research, I think it's really important that we think about how different people show up and how we center experiential knowledge. So this idea of context is really important. So how can we continue to grow and not make the same mistakes over and over unless we really look back at history in order to look forward? So for me with Outdoor School, a little background for those of you, most of you in Oregon know about our program, but legislation was passed in 2016 that provided funding for all 5th and 6th grade students in the state of Oregon to be able to attend a week-long residential outdoor school experience. But what we know is that not all kids go to outdoor school for a variety of reasons. So because outdoor school was developed for and by dominant culture, And attending outdoor school up until 2016 was really a privilege. And after the legislation, it became a right. Every student has a right to go to outdoor school. We needed to do a lot of work both at the state level and in working with our stakeholders and community members to really think about what equity meant in the context of outdoor school. So again, a lot of kids being left out. And in order to change this, we really need to think about what equity means in the context of outdoor school. So, I mean, makes a lot of sense for me to be working in this position because there needs to be a huge cultural shift so that all kids can feel welcome in outdoor spaces and parents feel comfortable sending their kids to outdoor school spaces.
Go ahead, Mauricio.
I'm going to start poking the bear. So, okay, if I stir the pot a little bit?
Please.
So, we are today and things are happening. The reason this conversation is so important is because, and it's on a lot of people's radar, is because of what is happening right now. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge all the things, how it relates to the topic of today's panel. And I feel very strongly, and I suspect this addresses a lot of our audience members today, that the reason we haven't made as many strides as we could have is because we live in this ignorance is bliss, sort of like this, when we start talking about the outdoors, you can almost, every time you see this group of folks talking about it, particularly white folks, you can almost hear like Jack Johnson and Eddie Vedder in the background play the ukulele and like, yeah, well, everybody loves the outdoors and why wouldn't they go out there? It's just like, so nature is the great equalizer. We all have this association of nature and then connecting. That is not at all the experience of most people of color. And he's not this whole Kevin Costner version of like, build it and they will come. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. And I feel that we need to start looking at this in a much more real way. Because when we talk about showing up exactly as you are in the outdoors, it means that, I mean, the reason, the fact that we're talking about that is it's just not a matter of like, oh, how nice would it be if we have more folks of color fishing and hiking and camping, but asking the question, why aren't they really there? Why are the Latinos not showing up? We have signs in Spanish, because that doesn't help. Because there's going to be a ranger in full uniform over there. Are you talking about first generation immigrants? There's so many of these things that are happening, but because of the water in which we swim, we are incapable of seeing that it doesn't work for everybody. And so unless we're making a true effort to understand the why and looking at ourselves very critically, Obama borders, lovers of the outdoors, Southeast Portland, free-spirited progressive liberals, no, it's not helping. You have to build relationships with the folks that you want to get in those spaces. And that's not going to happen with research studies. It's not going to happen with Google Analytics. It happens with being where they are and having some uncomfortable, awkward conversations. That's how I feel.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because that definitely leads me right into my next question for you anyways. And the next question is very much focused on how to overcome some of those original challenges that people focus on trying to even enter doing DEI work and creating this more inclusive space. And some of the things that were said in this chat so far are building authentic relationships and really trying to create them to be long-term, having a shared, clear, and end goal for this work, and identifying measurable and recognized improvements and challenges. Those are some of the challenges that some of the audience has noted. So how do you recommend starting this process for individuals and for teams? And what is some of those first steps that they can start diving into now, as well as you just mentioned, one, identifying it, yes, and then kind of go further from that. Do you want to, Mauricio, do you want to start us off, or Jessica, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, maybe Jessica. I feel like I've
Go for it.
too big of a mouth. Yeah.
Okay. So I think like one of the first things, at least in my journey, that really clicked into place and made me stop worrying about the fear so much is thinking about that this is an ongoing, ever-changing, ever-adapting thing. There's not really an end goal, right? Because as soon as you get to that end goal, you're going to hear from people about how you've done it wrong, or that something, you know, they weren't included, you missed some key thing. And like, as soon as you can set aside that fear, I think it lets you, or at least it let me, feel a lot more empowered to just, okay, we're just going to try this thing right in front of us and keep moving through things as we go. I think it's really, really important to have the conversation often and with so many people within your organization if you're going to get everybody to stand behind it. It can't be just the board. It can't be just the CEO or the executive director. It can't be just the leadership team. It has to be all the people at all the levels, the people that you're working with and trying to serve, or the people you're trying to invite into the conversation. And that is going to be hard because those people aren't always going to want to show up. You'll probably hear no more often than you'll hear yes. And you can't just give up. And you have to, I think when you hear that no, be willing to say like, okay, would you be willing to tell me why you said no? And poke at it a little bit more and not just give up right away. Because I think that's another thing people are starting to look for, is that there's a lot of empty invitations that go out. There's a lot of looking for the kudos of diversity and not really doing the work to invite that diversity and make that feel welcome. So those are some of the things that I think are really important. And I think it's really, I know money can be a struggle sometimes, but there's a lot, and I think we're all going to touch on these things that people can do that doesn't require cost. And one of the first things is understanding your position and what you stand for. And then I think going from there, how that plays out and how your team and how your staff and how the people that make up your organization can stand behind that position.
Definitely. James, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you, because when our first conversation about this, you had some great tips and tricks. And so please go ahead.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'd hate to think I'm ever tricky. But the bottom line, though, is that I think it begins with being comfortable with being uncomfortable, you know, and I think that too many people assume that to do something that is deliberate is inauthentic, or doing something that's inorganic isn't necessarily something that is something that you should have to do. I think a lot of people operate under the belief that if we have to coerce people into the outdoors, that we're not doing our job. I mean, it should happen naturally. The reality is that many of the issues when it comes to who spends time in nature and who doesn't, the systems were put in place deliberately. I mean, when we're talking, we can go all the way back to slavery, but we don't have to go back that far. Okay, we can take a look at Jim Crow segregation that lasted clear through the middle of the 20th century, and in many ways is still in effect in many parts of our country. It has nothing to do with the law, but it has everything to do with custom. So we have to then decide that we're going to be equally as deliberate in our efforts to remove these barriers. And that means quite literally going into communities and having conversations with people that we aren't comfortable talking with, okay, and admitting that we're having difficulty and that we're challenged. And quite literally make yourself vulnerable to the empathy of complete strangers. And, you know, and quite literally say it's critically important for the success of our organization. It's critically important to the success of the natural world that everyone get engaged and involved. What do you want to have out of a relationship with this community, with this particular area? You know, and many people will just be happy that we asked. Okay. And some people, yes, they will be insulted and push back, but I think it's at that point we have to be very persistent in our insistence that we engage these conversations. Because, you know, again, one of the biggest problems is that, I mean, everybody will tell you that, well, there's nothing stopping people from coming in, but there's nothing inviting them either, really. You know, we can say that our parks and our public land are open for everyone to use and enjoy, but unless we are very deliberate in our outreach to these communities, there's no reason for them to expect that the door that had been previously locked is now unlocked because it's not open. Okay, we need to open the door and invite people in, and in some cases, we might even have to hold their hands as they're coming in. And I think that we just need to be prepared to do that. And again, be comfortable with the notion that people will think that we're not doing it for their best interest. But the reality is that if it comes from a place that is genuine, you know, the intent will, I believe, countermand all of the discomfort in the long run. But you've got to start someplace.
Is it okay if I jump in, Spirit? Thank you. So, man, so many things. You know what Jessica was saying, with what James is saying. I think here's what I think. I think that there is this set of traits from white male culture that have permeated into how we behave in so many spaces. Like this: what's the end goal? What's my return on investment? You know, if you start here, what can you tell me that we've made success? What is this measurability rubric that we need to work with? And when you're talking about relationships, that just needs to, I mean, we're so data driven. You know, how many visitors? I can tell you how many times I've been asked, like, we need to have more Latinos in this event. How can we make that happen? Like, well, what have you done for them the rest of the year? You know, this is not a Valentine's Day special. I'll see you next year. People see that. People feel that someone's just trying to check a box somewhere. And so when and talking about what you were just saying, James, I think this is messy work, and it needs to be messy. It needs to be chaotic. We need to make mistakes. We need to fall. We need to get dirty. That's just the nature of it, because that enhances that sense of sincerity and being genuine. You know, there's this paralyzing fear that I see from a lot of folks trying to do this work that want to do it right. It's not the right way to do this. There's no right way to do it. You just need to do it, just like James says. Try something. If it doesn't work, try something else. I also saw, I think it was Dana, that the biggest challenge is that they think that they've done their part. I'm done. I did already. You know, hey, we have here, she's Black, and we have another guy here, and you know, this is how we represent. No, there's a very big difference between. So somebody was saying that diversity is a number, but inclusion is an action, right? That's it. It's not having people join the party, but it's to make them feel welcome, to make them feel that they actually belong there. There's no right way to say, like I said before, there's this fear, like, well, I don't want to offend you. I just want to make sure that I'm like, just talk with me. Just talk with me. And the thing, just like James says, the mere courage that it took you to become vulnerable with me is the bridge that is going to allow us to have a true conversation. So, sorry, Spirits, I just felt it was very pertinent to what they were saying.
No, that's perfect segue, Mauricio. I just like to echo back what a few folks have said so far, that this is absolutely a journey. It's ongoing. The work never stops. And I do think a lot of people are very afraid to start doing this work. I think the things that I would add to the conversation so far is that it's really important for, I mean, at kind of a meta organizational level, that organizations really consider the organizational why. Why are you engaging in this work? And then who is missing from the table? Who's missing from the conversation? Who needs to be at the table as you kind of create these plans for thinking through how to better include equity, diversity, and inclusion in your organizations. It is absolutely messy, tangled work, and these are conversations that don't just happen once. They're ongoing, and it's super important for not only at an organizational level, but at an individual level that folks really embrace the messiness and the discomfort. I think too, there's work that needs to be done, yes, on an organizational level on teams, but it is also really important that folks commit to doing this work personally, especially when it comes to building relationships with others. I would just, I think, end with this idea that it's really important that folks ask questions, but also not burden people of color and folks from marginalized identities and communities to teach you. It's really important to look for ways to not additionally burden Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities with this expectation that they're responsible for your education if you're white. You got to dig deep there and really consider those things.
Thank you. So true. Jessica, go ahead. I know you had something to add in.
Yeah. Just to pick up right where Spirit left off, I think, like, especially to that last point, now more than ever, I feel like there are so many resources and so many ways to do that work that are really just sitting out there on the internet or in your library. So don't be shy to do some Google research and figure some things out, because there are really great things out there. And then you don't have to burden people to be your teacher. You can do your own learning and thinking. But one of the things like that I just kind of wanted to touch on is, for me, I'm really into examples and tangible things and actions. And I think that's something that we really wanted to pull out of this panel too for everyone. And so I think, like, just to kind of give you an example of where Hike It Baby was and where we are now. And by no means are we very far along on this journey, or are we doing everything right or perfectly. I want to be really clear about that. But I think I look at right now where we are right before an election and where we were 4 years ago before our election, and Hike It Baby would have never taken any sort of stand or encouraged anybody to even go out and vote. That was not something we did. We were very mind our P's and Q's, ruffle no feathers, because we were very afraid of what would happen on social media and the fallout and how people would react. We were very big on no judgment, and so that meant we don't talk about politics. We don't talk about anything divisive or that would cause disturbance, right? It's just go out and hike with your babies and make friends, which is a great thing. But I think looking at where we're at now, we just launched a campaign to encourage parents to think about how they're going to vote this year and talk with each other about what options they have and how they can support each other, whether it's meeting in the park to go take care of each other's kids while adults take turns voting, or just finding out and having our ambassadors post like where the local polling places are so parents have those resources. That was a big leap for us, and I think it really only came in the last year or so that we have been working enough to make ourselves as a team comfortable with doing that and get our audience ready for actually hearing that and not reacting in a way that's like, oh, that's so counterculture to what I'm used to for Hike It Baby. But it took a lot of discussions with our team and a lot of hashing it out and a lot of, as Mauricio and James alluded to, the messiness, right, of trying to do things. And we're still learning and still figuring things out, but one of the things I think that's really helped our team is just sitting together and deciding what our mission, vision, values were and what we were missing, right? In terms of taking the time to say, okay, we have a mission that says we get families out hiking with their babies and young children, but so what? Like, how is that a mission? That's more of like an action than anything, right? And so now we've shifted and we've specifically added language about lowering barriers and wanting to make opportunities, which lets us then put more behind those things and make the arguments to our audience that this is what we think is important. Families need access to green space and they don't have it. So that's what we're going to be trying to do and encourage you to do so that you can take action. And as a team, we've also been doing some of those learnings together, which I also think has made everybody a lot more comfortable with just talking through things and thinking about like having the freedom to say like, this was something I had no idea about, right? Doing a reading together of a personal story and talking about our biases that popped up, or talking about just how it impacted us, and then spending the last like 20 or 30 minutes of the conversation about what we want it to mean for us and how we do our work at Hike It Baby. And that's a conversation we have as a team for about 2 hours once a month. It's not a big lift, but it's been so helpful. So I think there's just a lot of small things and some big things in there that don't really cost anything, but they do cost the energy and the commitment to really think through where you stand and why.
Yeah, Mauricio, do you have something to jump in really quick?
Yes, yes. And so I was a part of the process that Jessica was describing. And I think two things come to mind. And I think that it's dangerous to fall for the trap of intellectualization of the issue. You know, you can go and buy a whole bunch of books and you're better informed, but that has no impact. There's this intention versus impact. What is it really doing if it's not inspiring action? What it really is a narcissistic exercise to make people feel that they are doing their part. And there needs to be a segue, you know. I think the ability to philosophize about this issue is also a form of racism. Because if you think about it, all those families, all those folks that we're not seeing outdoors in those spaces, a portion of it is socioeconomical oppression. They don't have the opportunity to go and try to investigate their feelings and how they can fit better. That's not something that's afforded to us. This whole like, let's be, I mentioned this in the meeting right before this started. It's not about just being, you know, you can choose to do the right thing. You can choose to make moral decisions that will change the way in which people of color and underserved communities, people with multi-abilities, neurodiverse backgrounds, how they interact with whatever it is that you're doing. But it's still a question of optability. That is not something that we get to choose. And until you manage to put yourself in the position of understanding what it would be like if I didn't have a choice, I don't think there's a whole lot that really sits in, because that's ultimately what it is. What's in it for people? What's in it for your organization? What's in it for them? Why having a diverse group of people joining on whatever is your mission? What's in it for them? And why is diversity important all around, all together? A lot of people are throwing this whole melting pot and soup analogy, which I'm liking a lot lately, which is that you have this soup, right? You want to invite everybody, but before you join in, we're going to take away every flavor you've got because you need to fit the flavor of the soup that's already in the pot. That's a problem. You have to let people come in as they are with all their flavors, because that's going to make the soup so much better. That's what's in it for you. The more flavorful, the better. And so, and yeah, so actions, because this is the whole point of today's, how. So if you have whatever, you have $100, if you have $1,000, if you have many thousands of dollars, rather than hiring a marketing expert to go and figure out what is the best way that you can squeeze Facebook to give you the most likes, loves, go and organize a barbecue in the city park and get someone from the church in that community to help you organize it. It's personal connection. This has nothing to do with all this other stuff. That's where it starts. And I think that, and it can start from nothing, from having a conversation to like reinvesting what it really means. Show your commitment. Show that you mean what you say on that mission.
Yeah, that also goes directly into line of what we were going to ask next. And that's, how do you really engage your community, continue to bring them with you while you're growing your community? Because you have this goal to grow a more diversified community. How are you doing that? How are you bringing people with you and still being true to that vision and mission that you're talking about, Jessica? James, do you want to go and dive into that?
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do is make sure that your community members, your participants, have the ability to participate in meaningful ways, right up to and including assuming roles of leadership themselves, so that they're actually bringing to the organization what they want to see it become. Because too often, we find a lot of people kind of getting burned out on an organization because they're not allowed to participate in ways that are meaningful to them. Instead, they're constantly being asked to assimilate, to be more like everyone else, to do what the dominant culture is doing, because they find that they are marginalized, that they are not allowed to participate in meaningful ways. And it's really not until we encourage that to happen, so much so that, we quite literally take whatever the dominant culture is in our society. Most often it is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant beliefs of whatever. If we take that out of the center and move it to the margins where everyone else is, and then bring everybody else into the center and start establishing something new, that's how we actually have the ability to move these initiatives forward. Because I think that one of the things that we should constantly strive to do is reorganize whatever establishment, organization, business, whatever, is set to meet the interests and the needs of the constituency, especially when that constituency is growing and expanding and becoming no longer minority. As we are rapidly seeing, the demographics of the United States is changing, it's shifting to favor a non-white majority. Well, what happens when that non-white majority is being asked to protect a national park, or a public landscape, or a variety of other things, and they have no affinity for nature? We needed to develop their cultural awareness, cultural interests, so that they will be able to contribute to the overall and overarching goal, and that is indeed to make sure that these spaces are preserved for future generations. There's no way to do that if we aren't utterly inclusive, in our involvement of everyone who is part of the community.
Yeah, I appreciate that, James. And just to kind of piggyback on that, for us, it's also this larger question of who is not going to outdoor school and why. And as the funding agency that we most often work directly with schools and districts, who then work with our programs and providers, we are really committed to modeling what it means to be culturally responsive. So in the ways that our advisory committee is made up, who and what our leadership is committed to, very intentional recruitment, And we are continuing to try to develop and provide organizational self-assessment tools for programs, lots of professional development that's culturally responsive, and just trying to continually invite community and stakeholders into the entire process and being really transparent about that process.
I see you take yourself off mute, so I was gonna take it over.
I'm paying attention to the Q&A, and I'll try my very best. I don't know if this stays on, but I can try to type a proper response afterward. But a lot of what I see is that, what are your recommendations? Is this, how do we, what is where can we start? What is the right way to do it? And I get a lot of questions similar in the nature, like, how do you go after getting Latinos participating in this space? And as someone mentioned before, I am a Latino, but I'm a very small spectrum of Latino within the enormous, way in which Latinos can be. There's so many. I mean, I'm sure you guys are already familiar with the notion of intersectionality and how many layers of identity, interact and make you more vulnerable in one space, more in an insider group in the other. It's not the same. No culture is a monolith. And so you have to just look at whom you're trying to serve and really figure out, what does that community look like? Because it's not going to be people of color, Latinos, you have to go then try to understand what is it actually that you're trying to speak with, because they're going to have cultural markers and values that are going to be very different. And the mere effort of trying to understand that subsection a little bit better, it already makes whatever you're trying to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion significantly more effective. Because again, it's about that conversation. So no silver bullets, no golden plans. Go ask them, what do you need? How can I be present with you? I think that's really what it takes.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I mean, one thing that just kind of occurred to me, I think that it's really important that we also assume that we're wrong. Because anyone who thinks that they're right and they have all the answers is missing something. And I think that we need to constantly look and search and ask and question and decide that regardless of what we don't know, we're still going to persevere. Because I mean, the last thing I want is for someone to throw up their hands and go, "Oh, great, we're done." Well, what does that even mean? I mean, because we can't have it be a numbers game, because we can literally quintuple the representation of people of color in any space and still not have equity if they're not allowed to be successful. If we're not looking specifically at their interests and needs. I mean, we could literally, we can pull a bus up to, downtown Portland every Saturday morning and drive this population to some distant park and let them go, and we can instantly double our numbers. Okay, but if they don't have the tools, the experience, the equipment, the expertise, all the things that are important, it doesn't mean anything. So we have to constantly ask ourselves and ask other people what we can do to be successful, because it's not going to be defined by us. It's going to be defined by the people having the experience. And that's really, I think, incredibly critical. We have to continually ask, because there's going to come up something new that we never thought of before. We can never assume that we have all the answers.
Yeah, and I think, just to echo kind of a little bit of what everybody's saying, I think going into it with a lot less expectation, a lot more flexibility, and like a lot less willingness to give up, right? Just keep trying, because what you think people need or what you think your community wants, you're inevitably going to be wrong, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep working at trying to find what works and what's right.
Very much so. So I know, oh, do you want to jump in on something? I was just going to note the time that we're
That's what, yeah.
perfect.
So sorry, Morgan. Well,
No.
because we're running out of time, I just wanted to throw one more thing out there. If the question is money, like, because it is a lot about money, right? If the question is money, go to OregonIsAlive.org and apply for a grant. I'm going to be sitting at that table. I'm going to be looking to see more DEI focused projects coming this way. And if it has the right spirit, it has the right things, the right mindset, I'm going to try my absolute best to make sure that it sees some funding. I don't know if it's part of the rules or not, but I'm just going to post my phone number there. Call me. Call me. And we'll try to get this thing going.
Yeah, definitely. The support is there. Great. So it is 12:55, so I want to dive into questions, and the webinar is over at 1, if everybody's still good. I know we talked about this a little bit before, going just a little bit over. If you guys are welcome to stay, we're going to dive into some of those questions. And once again, this is recorded and will be sent to you later in the fall, and Travel Oregon will get that out to you all. So if you do have to sign off for next meetings, totally understandable. There is that survey that will pop up on your web browser as well. So please give us some feedback if you jump off. But I did want to dive into a few of these questions. Jessica asked, and Mauricio, you were kind of leading into this answer, but she asks, when creating more inclusive recreating opportunities, is time focused on developing different diverse opportunities for underserved communities, or trying to educate the underserved communities of the variety of experiences already available and encouraging them to take advantage of the opportunities already available? James, do you want to jump in on that one?
Well, in terms of things that are already available, I think that, yes, take advantage of the things that are already available. But if it was that simple, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Okay, we have to make sure that those things are available are also accessible. Okay, because you can have things be available all day long, but if people can't reach them for whatever reason, I mean, if it's transportation, if it's finance, if it's equipment, I mean, there are all of these things. So being able to make sure that something is available is a start. We also have to make sure that they are accessible, and that accessibility means listening to the barriers as they come up. Like, I can't tell you how many programs I've done where people say, well, we would love to have come, but we have no interest in camping. Okay. The outdoors doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spend the night. So if that's the case, make sure that if you're doing a camping trip, you have an accommodation for people who will just come, long enough for the campfire and then drive home, or stay at a hotel, or a variety of other things. I mean, we have to make sure that we are making accommodations wherever possible. And we cannot assume that just because someone doesn't participate doesn't mean that they don't want to participate. Sometimes they literally can't participate. You just have to understand what those things are.
A 1000% what James just said. It's, you have to honor not what you think the relationship with nature should be, but what the relationship with nature already is. You cannot expect them to say like, well, why don't you want, it's just so wonderful. It's just so quaint, delightful. What do you do? What do you do when you think of outdoor recreation, when you think about outdoor fun? What does it look like for you and your family? You'd be surprised the kind of responses that you get from folks.
Jessica or Spirit, do you have anything to add in for that question?
Well answered by both James and Mauricio.
Awesome, completely agree. There's two more that I want to get to if you guys have the time. The first one that is here is, how do you manage cultural differences with environmental protection? such as unresponsible recreating, such as natural waste removal and other environmental protection?
I'll take a stab. I'm not sure that they can be unrelated. You know, as the committee was going through some of the proposals, trying to imagine, there was a in the Oregon Conservation Advisory Committee, there was like people really being concerned that if we expand recreation to rural sides of Oregon, there's going to be a huge environmental impact on these refuges and these natural spaces. And even before that, I think it seems a little naive to not associate that one goes with the other. If there is people in nature, there's going to be an impact. There's just no two ways about that. So goes back to just seeing where is that where your organization stands, what is that you're trying to achieve, and to what degree those human interaction have an impact or have an influence. And then see how is that any cultural nuances also is associated with it. James touched upon that. Like teaching folks what happens when you go out into nature, the whole leave no trace thing. Why is it important? Why does it matter? Right? They're going to show up knowing nothing. And we would expect them to behave with this degree of etiquette that comes with spending your whole life going camping with your dad. That's irrational, right?
I think also adding to that, just like what do they know already, and what are those, learning more about what those practices are within their own cultures and what you can draw out from that.
And I'd just like to draw attention to something that Sabrina said in the chat, which I think is really important. Major takeaways to remember: how you recreate is not necessarily the way others will, and that's okay. Taking a look at your rules that are in place that were put up to limit access to keep groups out. And I think that's a really important point.
Most definitely. So we have one question left if you guys have the time to do so. And this is coming from Nicole. What are a few things you would like to see present in outdoor spaces such as public parks, whether it be big or something small, but perhaps essential? What do you think different communities might want to see? To clarify, this is not the end all fix all, but perhaps some small pieces within inclusion and accessibility coming from your own experience.
I'll start, and I'm sure others have things to add, and maybe this seems small to some folks, but not necessarily to folks in Indigenous communities. But I would like to see Native place names present in public parks and in wilderness spaces, signage or whatnot. But I think that's a huge way to think about decolonizing outdoor spaces.
Similarly to what Spirit is saying, I think there is this unspoken rule of ownership that comes with this. I mean, just the font in the signage, the way it's displayed, it's just like it has a profile. And when you are an outsider, you know when you don't fit. So there's several things that go into it. A super random one that just came to mind. If there's a public park and there's a picnic bench and you see a sign in Spanish that says like, yeah, bring your music, bring your food, make it a party. That gesture by itself, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna call my friends, I'm gonna call my cousins. I'm gonna be here next weekend. Little things, they're never little, Spirit. Because when you're building relationships, it's that wedge. Somebody needs to see that you mean it, that you're genuine about what you're trying to do. And that is a conversation starter that you couldn't get anywhere.
I'm going to give the mom answer. I think having more wheelchair accessible, well-maintained bathrooms that also have a changing table space is really valuable to families. And also people in wheelchairs and people with disabilities. There's a lot of overlap there. And I think if you think about things, there's overlap in a lot of these different solutions. So just thinking about those things, and maybe that can help prioritize what gets selected.
You know, I'll just add one last thing along that same vein is, you know, a complete interpretation of the history of a region, you know, to include the historic contributions of all people. You know, I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I've been places where entire sections of the contributions of, you know, so-called minorities are just left out, you know, in favor of the dominant cultural narrative. And I think that we need to find those stories, the good and the bad, you know, and point them out wherever possible. You know, we don't necessarily have to erect statues, you know, but at the very least, you know, signage or even, you know, a mention on a website, you know, that has information about a region should be inclusive of everyone's contributions.
Yeah, very true. Thank you guys all so much for your education, your knowledge, and sharing it with this community. I know I personally have taken away so much from this conversation, and I look forward to continuing these conversations. As we know, this is not an end-all be-all. This is a continuous effort, and I look forward to seeing what everybody does and starts taking action on moving forward as that evolves. So thank you guys all so much for being here from the bottom of my heart. Your knowledge is very much appreciated. So that is the end of our panel. As I mentioned, this is recorded. You will get that recording here from Travel Oregon in the fall. And also, once again, we are looking for that feedback. It's going to pop up in your web browser where it popped up the Zoom meeting. So please go ahead and take a few minutes there. And hopefully we'll see you guys all online soon, and hopefully even sooner outside on a trail again. But thank you guys all so much, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, gracias, gracias. Adiós.
Everyone, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.